Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for this LFA Digital London Festival of Architecture event hosted by MEB Design Architects. So I'm going to hand over to Mark Edison, our director at MEB Design, who's going to start things off. There we go.
Good. Well, good evening, everybody. Thanks for joining us at our London Festival of Architecture event, which this year, as you've seen, features an online exhibition, thanks to COVID, and a discussion. We're here to celebrate architecture and the positive contribution it can make to the environment. For this year's festival, we developed the virtual exhibition of our educational projects in line with the year's theme, which is power. We hope you found the exhibition navigable, the questions stimulating, and your interests piqued by the pictures. We already know how appropriate lighting and good acoustics can impact teaching for the good, and we want to explore and evaluate how architecture more broadly can empower the learning process, how we can make learning more fun, provide visual clues for memory in bite-sized bits of information, as well as make it a good shared experience. So we are MEB Design, an architectural practice. We're 37 years old and experienced across quite a number of sectors. We have 20 or so people on board, located in 3 studios, working generally with communities of people, such as schools, churches, theatres, etc. Our vision statement is to build communities through creativity, one design at a time. Now let's introduce the hosts. My name is Mark Edison. I'm a director. I'm a founder of the practice. I work out of the London studio and I live in Harpenden.
Hello everybody, good evening. My name's Charles Darby. I'm also a director of the practice. I help to set up and help to run the Oxford office. I'm also the education lead for MEB Design, and traditionally that's been about 30 to 40% of our workflow. So it's a large area that we've got many years of experience. And so we look forward to sharing some examples and case studies with you tonight.
My name's Will Jones. I'm an associate architect at MEB Design. I'm going to be managing the chat and talk and questions after Charles and Mark's talk. So look forward to hearing those at the end of the presentation.
We are recording, aren't we, Will?
Yes. So yeah, just to note that we're recording this presentation. So by sharing your videos, you're just agreeing to share this recording after the talk.
Okay, so our format is we plan to go for about an hour. We're going to take you through the exhibition for half of that time, hopefully, and then have time for a discussion, which Charles will chair. We're interested to know what you think we might have done well or not so well, what to avoid and to improve, and where further opportunities to enhance learning through architecture may lie. So now to the pictures and the questions they raise. You will see how we have sought to either consciously or subconsciously include visual ways to aid learning. We've tried to, where we can, help students focus on the content of their lessons and teachers to mix in new content, and we hope there are some visual markers which will help the students remember the facts. Our first question was, can the engineer learn anything from the structure? And we start with Albury School in Harpenden's multi-purpose hall. Now, imagine you're a child sitting where this photograph is taken. You are operating the sound desk, which isn't in the picture, but it's very close by, as it's your interest. One day, you might become a sound engineer. what can the child pick up about sound and the way it's handled in this room? You might know
I think I've a bit lost your audio there, Mark.
I can hear Mark, okay?
Okay, sorry, that was just from my side there. It's back now.
Okay. So we're looking at the slots, and they avoid an annoying echo. The end wall at the far end has a dark curtain in front of a bare light wall. Is it possible to discern how the curtain might work better as a backdrop for a play, but the bare wall better for a concert? And why are the chairs upholstered? Was that just someone's whim, or is there a good reason? All these things are exposed and visible, but the visible will stay invisible till someone points it out. But at least as architects, we have provided the possibility someone can point it out at some moment in time. The next photograph is of the same building, where the superstructure is under construction. The picture shows how the structure, using certain new methods of prefabrication off-site, can be erected in a very short space of time. In this case, it was over a summer holiday. We can see just on the left-hand side, the part of a very tall crane, which was used to lift the panels into position to be propped before the roof was put on. But this all took place over the summer holiday. So the teaching opportunities of the construction method and the physics of erecting structures couldn't be demonstrated to the children. And something has perhaps been missed, even if for good reasons. And there's also an environmental lesson here. The benefit of consciously choosing to use renewable materials like wood rather than concrete or steel. That at least remains identifiable should the teacher ever want to talk about the ways to respond to climate change.
Thanks, Mark. So now we're going to talk about another project, which is the Dragon School in North Oxford. And this was their new forum building. And in terms of engineering structure, what you might notice in this photograph is the flying mast structure, the white structure in the middle of the picture that's held in place with tensile cables. So a very visible pop-up structure holding up the ETFE roof. And this was the first time that this type of structure had been used in this country. But around that part of the project, you can also see painted in two different colors of blue, the vertical columns and the horizontal steel beams. The columns are expressed columns, so you can see them going from their full height from top to bottom. So if you're a child in this space, these things are all exposed. They're different colors. You could pick out what the different parts of the structure are and the different uses of different parts of the structure. So all of this visible structure could be potentially pointed out and explained to a pupil to show how this building works and how the structure of this building works. So looking at the same project at the Dragon School from the outside, we're going to just talk a little bit about materials. So first of all, the ETFE roof on top. So ETFE is the inflatable fabric material, which is made well known by the Eden Project in Cornwall. This particular one is a 3-layer ETFE cushioned roof, and the interesting thing is there are 3 different layers that all have different purposes. So the inside layer is white and provides shading, but it also means that from the inside it feels like it's a tent. The middle layer is a milky layer, which also has a shading element, but a thermal and acoustic properties as well, so it helps to trap the air in the middle. And the top layer is clear, so from the outside it looks like a bubble. But depending on the sky and the conditions outside, the top layer is sometimes transparent and sometimes reflects the sky. So you get different effects on different days, and depending on the weather, you can see different parts of the way the roof is fabricated. There is a piece of work about how acoustics work with this type of roof, but also with the hard surfaces around the inside. And you can look on the outside, you can see the structural glass framing. So this is a frameless glass, but you can see the fixings that hold this frameless glass back to the structure behind. So all of these bits of structure are visible. They all relate to each other, but you can see also the relationships between these modern materials and how they compare to the more traditional brickwork and blockwork and stonework of the buildings around it. So it would be another example where pupils could learn from the nature of these materials and their different characteristics. So the next question we posed ourselves was about the scientist, and can the scientist learn from the environmental systems and other parts of a building? So this first slide is Bradfield College, and it's the Blackburn Science Centre. This building was specifically designed to incorporate lots of environmental and ecological features, and they were deliberately designed as learning aids. So there are many examples from this building of things that we could talk about as part of tonight's talk. But in this particular slide, we can see pupils looking into two ponds. So the pond at the back, they are looking into the side, they can see through a glass wall, and they can see what's happening below the water. The pond in the foreground is a more traditional view of a pond from the top, where you mainly see vegetation and what's coming out of the water or happening above the water. But we've put in a ramp to get down to the lower level. So this learning experience is an accessible one that even somebody in a wheelchair could get down and enjoy the view below the water. These ponds are also positioned close to the building. Just to the right-hand side of this slide is a door into the building. This is the kind of rear terrace of the building. So it's very easy to bring a class out here. So it's very easy to bring pupils out and to work around these ponds and pools rather than having to go into a meadow somewhere. So this is the same building looking at the outside. So I mentioned before, this was a building that we won the competition on the basis of not only incorporating the environmental features, but making them part of the design so that they became a learning resource. And here we can see people on the roof of the building. When the building was being constructed, we actually set up a viewing point on this slight bank hillside overlooking the site. So that made it possible for pupils to look at and understand the building process as it went on without having to go into the building site. But now the building's completed, we have this space on the roof. And so the glass bridge across joins the two wings of the building together and gives access out into the enclosed area. And from here, you can see all of the environmental features of the building. So you can see the PV solar panels, which are very prominent on the roof. The roof itself is a green roof. Part of it is sedum, and the part in the foreground you can see is a wildflower meadow, which is very good from an ecological and biodiversity point of view. But you can also see the ventilation stacks on the roof, one just behind the people at the front of the picture, and another one through the glass bridge at the back. So that's part of the natural ventilation strategy for the building. And you can even see the boiler flue to the right-hand side, which comes up from the biomass boiler in the front semi-basement of the building. So this extra space on the roof not only provides a teaching facility, but it gives flexibility for how the building can be used and how teaching can take place. And in these current times of COVID-19, having an outdoor flexible teaching space is something that might be particularly valuable. An extra space and flexibility in particular are something that could well be very useful. We had client feedback from this building from the head of science, who noted that after this building was opened, the uptake of sciences in the school increased quite dramatically. So the effect of the inspiration of this building is something that's clearly identifiable.
Okay, our second science presentation is the Beacon School's Science Lab corridor. Here is a periodic table set out and used as a teaching feature in a vinyl floor. It makes the corridor interesting and colourful rather than a common and mundane circulation area. Children will be shown the periodic table in books or on a teaching screen or as a chart on a wall, but here is a different way to interact with it and get to know and understand the table better. Do we think the floor shown here will do so? Probably. You can imagine children using the colours as maybe stepping stones, or perhaps inventing some game similar to hopscotch. And the table creates a childhood memory. You can see the elements are differently colored. This creates life and interest, but you can also see the elements have been color coded. On the right, orange for transitional elements, green for non-metals, blue for noble gases, etc. And we hope it has helped the teacher talk about scientific content in a different way. This is the science lab off the corridor. The same periodic table shown on the screen. I think the corridor is more interesting. The room has fixed units along both sides, supplying the benches with things like gas and water for experiments. These need to be fixed, obviously, but in the middle are movable tables in a flexible arrangement. Desks can be put out in a traditional way, individually in rows, or set out as tables for group work and discussion. And there are electric floor boxes supplying any arrangement of tables as and when needed. This ought to assist the teacher cover the different ways by which each of us learn. Our third question was, what can a technician learn from building technology? And this is a school theatre in Woodbridge. The picture shows quite a sophisticated technical gallery in a school theatre. You can see the walkway, the black walkway, but there's also a grid across the roof space above the auditorium level, 2 floors below, where you can see someone sitting on the front bench. The grid is a cable net floor which can take the weight of people, including the weight of a person in a wheelchair, and it's on tensioned wires. It means the whole technical gallery can be opened up to pupils, not just staff, because it's safe. It gives pupils access to lighting, to other gear, where they can be taught how to angle and change the lights for different types of performance. This is the same theatre's auditorium. It's the things we cannot see which are worth exploring here, and to understand if we could have done better, should we want the building to be a teaching tool. The hidden things here are environmental services, matters to do with comfort and warmth, as well as the operational mechanisms put in place to make the theatre flexible by rearranging seats, raising, lowering, extending or shortening the stage, or moving things around the stage. The room needs plenty of air. When the warm lights are on and it's a warm summer's evening and there are loads of bodies packed closely together in a performance, all you can really see is a small round swirl diffuser along the bottom of the picture below the seat, which does the job, but you have to look hard for that sort of thing. And the stage specifically can be raised or lowered on air pistons, the same way the tailgate of your car is raised without effort. It's not a so sophisticated a way to ease the effort and speed at which this can be done, but there's no way to know. And you would never know air technology is used to move the prosceniums. Here's another of our school theatres at Queenswood. I don't know if anyone has counted the number of rows in the auditorium. The answer is 11, so it's not so far to the back. The same distance applies obviously to the gallery. And to compare this with many traditional schools' halls, there might well be a 4 foot or more high raised platform at one end, maybe 20 or more rows to the other, within a much longer, thinner room. If you imagine a child standing on this stage in front of an audience, he would have, or she would now have the benefit of microphones. But how would you train a child to speak and project his or her voice so it gets to the back of this room? Our design picks up this question. The gallery was a conscious choice and included because it becomes natural for the child to lift his head and get used to looking up, not down, as many traditional school halls might have encouraged. And because it's not so far to the back, a voice will not have to strain at too young an age before it's fully formed to be heard. This is the same theatre's gallery, another view looking towards the stage this time. And as a pupil, you can become very aware of the technical installations if you look. In front of the gallery upstand is a bar, a lighting bar, where lights are accessible and reachable. You can also very easily operate the follow spot from the gallery and the corner landing in front of you. Overhead, the void is brought down low, where you become aware of equipment not far away, and you can see light is directional onto the stage, onto the auditorium seats, leaving the galleries below in darkness. We might call this an entry-level theatre, where all going on can be seen. So we'll move on to our next question, which is the artist. Can the artist learn from the composition? This is Tunbridge School's new art CDT department staircase. We sought to form the shape and details of the staircase so it would inspire design and also in its own way provide a focal hanging exhibition at the center of the new department. You'll notice the various features on the stairs. There is the structure colored differently in red from the steps, which are in white. So the stairs components are clear and noticeable. There's a hanging rail just at the bottom of the picture from which supports and suspends the hanging exhibition. There's a double height handrail with lower part at good height for all pupils and a higher rail above for safety. And from it you can see into the various departments and their different disciplines. And of course, people can see out of those as well. The same art CDT buildings teaching area is shown here, reached from that staircase. Two things are noticeable. It has an open plan, so different areas flow into other areas. And above, you can see there's a gallery which looks down onto the activities below. The idea was for the architecture to help pupils inspire other pupils. A 14-year-old up on the gallery can see what an 18-year-old is doing below and aspire towards something. And the connection between departments hopefully might help ideas cross-pollinate between disciplines more easily than if there were doors and walls.
Thanks, Mark. So we're going to carry on with the artist and talk about another project at the Dragon School. And this is the Dragon School Art Design Technology building. And this slide is of an art studio. We're going to talk about a little bit about how the colours and the relationship between materials makes a difference to the teaching environment. So this is for a younger age group of pupil than the Tunbridge School examples that Mark was just talking about. So in some ways it's a simpler building, a little bit less sophisticated, and different messaging needed and used throughout this building. So this is one of 4 studios. There were 2 art studios, a pottery studio and a design technology studio. So the art studios were painted and decorated in pastel colours as a fairly simple plain backdrop to the art that was going to go on, so the art could be exhibited around the walls. The ceramic studio was coloured with terracotta and earth colours, and we're going to look at the design technology studio in a moment, which was much more primary colours. But as well as the colours, the pattern in the floor, you can see a blue band running around the grey flooring, and the teaching zone, the tables are set within the area of the blue band, and then the storage and resource zone is arranged around the outside. So hopefully the colours and the patterns and the arrangement of this class helps a teacher to manage the class and also inspires the pupils to get on with their work. So this is the design technology studio in the same building. And I mentioned about the primary colours. So we've got a red floor, we've got yellow, very visible structure. And in fact, the other colour in the building is blue. You can see a blue door in the background, but the outside colours and the gallery staircase in this space are blue. So primary colours, much more active, busy, less calm. There might be a piece about the psychology of colours that we could discuss with that. But also this building was designed in the 1990s, and the high-tech movement and the technology teacher who was responsible for this space was particularly keen on the Pompidou Centre in Paris. You can just about see some exposed dust extraction ductwork on the left-hand side. He was very keen for the structure to be visible and brightly painted. But it's also a thing about materials that you can see how they're joined together. You can see the steel trusses are bolted to the steel column, and the fixtures and the fittings are all visible, so they can again be pointed to and used as a teaching aid as to how materials can be used. The glazing in the background looks through into the pottery studio, and there are windows opening out onto external terraced areas. So following on from one of Mark's themes, the idea of being able to cross-pollinate between areas, but for the technology students to be able to see what the pottery students are doing, and vice versa. So the whole building is acting as a prop and a tool and a reference point for the pupils to learn from. So we're going to move on to our next question, which is about the sports person, and can the sports person learn from the layout of a building? This first slide is the Manor Prep School, and it's their new sports hall. So it's important to think pupils learn from sport. They don't just learn to do sports, but they learn about performance, they learn about safety, they learn about other things relating to sport. And materials and technology are particularly important in explaining different aspects of this. So if you look at this sports hall, you can see a number of things that we've already spoken about. There's an acoustic treatment to the underside of the roof. There's lighting positioned in certain ways to maximize the lighting in the right places for the sport. And there's high-level glazing. We might come back to the high-level glazing in a future slide, so just bear that in mind. But what I want to look at in this slide is the floor. So this is a sprung timber floor. It's built up in layers on battens, and then on top of it is a vinyl sheet. So there's quite a lot goes into the floor, and quite a lot of research has been done about types of floor. And sprung floors reduce injuries from repeated impacts, so jumping and falling. Particularly necessary for basketball, and a lot of work has been done on basketball. This hall was primarily going to be used for netball, so we followed the basketball technology and put in the sprung timber floor. But the vinyl surface is a better surface for some other sports, bearing in mind it's a flexible use space. So for example, for tennis or badminton, the vinyl surface might be a slightly better finish. So it's important to understand the primary use of a space and for design for that accordingly, but also to understand what the secondary uses might be. But it's also interesting to see that pupils could learn about performance, technology, safety from the features that are in the environment around them. So the same building, and this is the entrance to the sports hall. And it's important to think about the areas around the main facilities. So the entrance lobby, this is much more than just a corridor leading to the changing rooms. It's an arrival point. And the glazed doors look back to the main school building and are clearly visible as the entry point to this building across the playground. The entrance is also light and airy with two sets of glazed doors leading through to the lobby and a big skylight above. So there are sort of markers and clues to the identity of this building as soon as you come into it. So I want to just talk about patterns and colours. So the floor pattern is like a set of tram lines running across this concourse, and which might refer to markings in the sports hall. They also have colours that pick up colours in the school. And from these tram lines, the pattern breaks out and starts to move towards other uses like the offices and the changing rooms. So there's a sense of movement in the space. But on the right-hand wall, you can also see the green wall, which is the main school colours. So, for example, in this building, the lockers were coloured after the school houses and the school teams. And this main wall in the entrance lobby was the school green. And this was the wall that the trophy cabinet was going to go in front of. So there's a message about teamwork, about identity, and about shared success that's embodied into the design of this building. So moving on to the Royal Grammar School project in Guilford, this is a new sports centre that we designed for them. So we talked about light in the main spaces, but this is a secondary space, so a training conditioning room. You can see pupils on rowing machines. There's also cross trainers in this space. But it's important not to forget the lighting is important in these areas too, and that a sense of performance, it needs to be carried through and understood in all areas. So levels of light and qualities of light are appropriate for different activities, but maximizing natural light is always a good thing. A lot of sport replicates things that we do outside. So here we've got a full height glazed wall, and but it's an obscured glazed walling system. So it's letting in maximum amounts of natural light, but it has a thermal and acoustic property, and a shading property, but it also is providing privacy. So while these students are exercising, they're not feeling like they're exposed or in front of a shop window. So things like this and understanding lighting help the pupils to understand the factors that affect their performance when they're carrying out their sports. And moving into the main hall at the Royal Grammar School, and going back to the point I made earlier about lighting, we've got lighting, electric lighting at high level, and we've also got high level glazing. So referring back to the earlier slide, getting high level light or outside light, natural light into a sports hall is a really beneficial thing. But also you want to avoid getting glare from a low setting sun or from low level winter sun. So the glazing in this building is set at an angle and is also underneath the overhanging eaves. So, so you provide shading to stop that light coming in. But there's some thoughts about safety here as well. The escape doors in the background have got recessed handles, and fixtures and fixings on the wall are recessed, and the cricket nets are bundled up into a safe packaging above ground level. For pupils to understand a safe environment to carry out their sport and to be able to risk assess when it's safe to do sport, it's something that happens in swimming with survival awards and survival tests, but it's not something that very often happens in sport and sports halls, where pupils can take away lessons to learn about what might be a safe park or yard to play sport in.
So finally, to the historian. Can the historian learn from the fabric of the building? This is Denstone College, a public school in Staffordshire, originally for boys, now a co-ed. But it was a Victorian school, and it has much to say about the past by what is expressed in its architecture, which could be used as a visual aid to history teaching, to historic facts and attitudes. On the left-hand side, you can see the imposing Anglo-Catholic chapel. Would anyone know this is something to say about the two sides of an ecclesiastical debate going on at the time between the Tractarians and the evangelicals, as well as saying something about the religious priorities of the school's foundation? Stand in the shoes of a boy arriving for the first time 150 years ago. What message might he have received in front of this rather foreboding place? Maybe something like this. Here starts your preparation for ruling an empire. Here you will learn to stand on your feet, put away feelings, knuckle down, and become a man capable of looking after himself. How might we build on this narrative in design terms in the 21st century? I often thought about buildings as stories which on a timeline. The new building picks up some of the language of the gables and dormers of the original building, but is gentler and softer in response, taking up the sensitivities of our modern times, and is smaller and lower in scale. Here is the new teaching block internally, because when we go inside, we found how teaching has changed since those days. Gone a long corridor, in comes an atrium. Gone is the bleaker accommodation of more disciplined times, of learning by rote, of languages like Latin and regimentation. There's light, there's more warmth, you can often see out or through, there's opportunity to connect, to bump into people, to integrate across departments, and there's space to interact in the concourse below as part of the atrium. These historic changes are clear, but does anyone notice and use the visual aid?
So looking at a final couple of examples under the title of the historian, this is Abingdon School and the refurbishment of their main school, what they call big school building, that we carried out over the course of a summer. And this is in fact a religious studies theology classroom, but there's a painting on the back wall, and there's a conversation about functional flexible spaces, but also using references to the past and to history. and using decoration as a way of identifying the language and the subjects being taught. So this flexible wall is a folding sliding wall that joins the classroom to another space. But the picture on it is a famous painting called the School of Athens, which comes from a wall in the Vatican. And on this painting are a series of images of philosophers through history, historically incorrect because they're all in the same picture, but it's a way of identifying different philosophers and could be used as a teaching aid. So rather than being a blank wall at the back of a classroom, this can be used as a visual reference that a teacher could point to and that pupils could learn from. And the same project is the old school library. So this is the heart of Big School, the original set piece part of the teaching facilities at Abingdon, but it's no longer appropriate for its purpose. It's not large enough. This space used to be full of book racks, but it doesn't have any of the technology and breakout spaces and shared spaces that a modern resource centre or learning centre in a school of this type might have. So we repurposed this space as the school staff room. So you can see in this building the old history of the windows on the left-hand side and the roof structure, and a slightly more recent history of an intervention of a gallery put in probably in the 1970s on the right-hand side with extra book racks. In the foreground is a new staircase that we put in that picks up the language of the 1970s intervention. But this space now serves as a starting point for the teachers at the beginning of their working day. So the layers of history and the ethos and the background of this school are all in this part of the building. So rather than being a centre of learning as it used to be as the school library, it's now become a centre of teaching and a point of inspiration for the teachers at the beginning of each working day as they go out to start their lessons. So just to conclude, we come on to our final slide. And this is Beaudesert Park School, where we designed a performing arts centre. We started with an image of this slide, and it's appropriate that we finish with an image of this building, because this building encompasses quite a lot of different things we've talked about, whether it's the technology aspects, the sustainability measures, acoustics, performance. This building relates to a listed building, so it's a modern building in a historic setting. This is a dance studio, but it's also the entrance concourse, and the folding sliding wall behind has got mirrors on it rather than a painting, but it's providing flexible space for modern teaching and modern use. And hopefully this is an inspirational building, as we hope many of our buildings are, for pupils to learn and for teachers to teach. So thank you very much for listening. Thanks very much for attending. We're going to have a question and answer session, which will be live questions. I don't know whether anybody's put anything on the chat, but we'll end the slideshow and go back into screen sharing. If anybody has any questions that they'd like to put to us, then we'll be happy to carry on having a bit of a chat or to explain ourselves a bit further. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Charles and Mark. That was a really, really fascinating talk. So if anyone's got some questions, we've got sort of two options with how you could ask the question. You either got the chat menu, which I think will be in the bottom right corner for most people. You might need to go to raise the bar at the bottom of the screen to open the chat window. So you can write questions here. Alternatively, if you use the hands up tool, I can see that, and then we could unmute. And you could ask your question to Charles and Mark live. So I think we'll just get started while people are thinking about their questions. But I just had a question about how you were talking about flexibility just on that last slide, Charles, or maybe Mark as well. How do you, when you have a situation where the school is asking for a very flexible space, but it still needs to be very specific to the needs that they're asking for? How do you sort of balance that dual demands?
Yeah, thanks, Will. I'll pick up on that first, and then maybe Mark will come in. I think something we always say is that it's important to understand what the primary use of a space is. I mentioned that partly when I was talking about the sports hall project. But it's important to design for the primary use and get the facility and the functions right for that use. But at the same time, to understand what secondary and tertiary uses might come into a space as well. So things like the design of the floor, or getting the right technical specification for the floor, or adding in folding sliding walls, getting the acoustics right in the folding sliding walls, so that you can create flexibility by being able to join spaces together or open spaces out, or to be able to use a sports hall for taking exams, but understanding the parameters. And if there is an impact on something that you might be doing, something might be having a negative impact on your primary use, but understanding what those parameters are, so you can at least advise the client and make informed decisions about how much flexibility is possible and at what compromise or cost to the primary uses. Mark, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
It's something that has to be talked through. I think you can build in too much flexibility, and then you end up not doing any one of the tasks in required of that building well at all. The first project we looked at was Albury School's multi-purpose hall, and in there you can do drama, you can do a concert, you can have school assembly, you can do exams, and you can do after school activities that aren't too boisterous. If you wanted more flexibility, you'd have to think about different lights, or if you wanted, for example, to have a choral concert in there rather than a play, you'd end up with issues of resonance and sound. Fine for a play, fine for speaking, but not good for music that requires a long reverberation time. So these things have to be very clear in the briefing and talked through well. And as you said, Charles, it's the same with sports, isn't it? You can have a floor that's good for basketball, but it won't work for a cricket net unless you do something. So either you compromise, or you have to spend an awful lot of money to get a large amount of flexibility, which is perhaps too expensive in the long run.
Okay, thank you for that. Just on acoustics, we just had a question from Lilia. She asks how you go about reducing the noise in Victorian classrooms.
Yeah, okay. Well, that's it's a good question, and it might have been visible in one of the slides, but we put some acoustic rafts at high level, and something we particularly tried to do at Abingdon. We worked through a number of types of building, from the old Victorian parts of the school through to some 1950s and 60s and 70s buildings, and we incorporated lighting and acoustic ceiling systems, so that there was a common language shared across the classrooms, and also quite often a common height, so that the lighting and acoustic rafts would be put at similar heights, so that regardless of whether you were going into a space that had a big tall pitched ceiling above it, or a 1960s building that had a flat roof on it, there'd be a similar feel and characteristic to the classrooms. So treating the ceilings with acoustic rafts is one way of dealing with that, but also understanding what the wall materials are and what impact they have, and what the carpet or flooring material and impact that has may be, and calculations can be carried out to deal with those things. Another aspect of that is noise transmission between spaces, so putting down layers underneath floors to make sure that there's not a lot of noise coming down from classrooms above to classrooms below, and secondary treating existing walls to make sure that sound transmission through the walls is possible. But there's a lot of acoustic retrofit possibilities and materials that can be used, but something we've tried to work on over the years is actually incorporating those into the design, so that they have a secondary function and an aesthetic function, rather than just being an add-on or a bolt-on that gets put in later. Mark, okay. I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Well, only that acoustics has been recognised by everyone as being incredibly important in a classroom, that you need to have the right reverberation time, as well as acoustic privacy from noise outside the room. And that's recognised, and it's very important, and we need to look after the students who need to hear what the teacher is being said in whatever way we can.
Yeah, Okay, thank you very much for that. So Sajid asked, she asked, what have you learned from the actual way teachers and students have used your schools you've designed? And were there things that surprised you about how they actually used them?
That's a good question as well. It was interesting, the Dragon School Forum project that I showed you quite near the beginning of the presentation. One of the way we designed that building as an outdoor sort of covered play area, but also a circulation space and a breakout space. So it has the school theatre to one side of it, or the main school hall, but it has also classrooms and science labs quite nearby. So it acted as a kind of congregating space between classrooms. But as part of our presentation to the school governors, we put together a series of sketches or vignettes of different ways that the space could be used, from an art exhibition to an evening drinks reception, a foyer to the theatre, or even for fencing or for doing martial art sports in the space. But what we discovered when we went back to do snagging and to look at the building afterwards, and when we went back to look at classrooms around it, was that the teachers had found all sorts of other ways to use it. They were hanging things off the tensile cables, they decorated the walls, they used it for a Christmas market, and the steps were used for groups to sit on. So it actually became possible for the teachers had occupied and been much more flexible in terms of how that space was used than even we'd been able to imagine when we first designed the space. The feedback is incredibly important, and going back and seeing spaces in use, there's nothing better than going back and seeing how a space is actually being used in reality, but also talking to the pupils and talking to the teachers about what they found about how the space works, and taking those lessons and feeding them into projects in the future.
I think it's something we could do more of. I think feedback is being recognised as becoming much more important. So we have RIBA stage 7, don't we, to the post-construction evaluation. And it's something that I think we need to do more of and learn more from. And the problem is the pressure of time, but we do need to do it. And I think the question just jibs us up as architects generally to think about this a bit more and to make time for it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we had a question from Sadika. She's asked if you could describe the process of engaging with schools to develop schemes.
Yeah, Mark, do you want to start on that?
Well, there's often two ways we get approached by a school. One is to start off by developing a strategic plan, which is getting some idea of how to develop the site over the next 10 years. And the other, of course, is they just need an individual building, or they've got one particular problem. But I think the first thing we have to do is engage and get familiar with the school. We need to understand who they are, what their values are, what their ethos is in whatever building project we do. That might involve going and absorbing the school a bit by spending time there, observing the day, asking questions, and at some point chatting with the staff and even consulting with the staff. So we get familiar with the place, but we've also got to understand the problem, and we need to spend as much time as necessary to do our research, to ask questions, and to get an understanding at a deep level of the problem we've got to solve. So we engage, I think, in answer to that question, or at least I would try to, by understanding who the client is, who they are as an institution, and also what it is that they're trying to solve, to get a proper grip of that. Because you can't solve a problem unless you understand it well.
Great. Will, I've got a 5-minute countdown at the top of my screen. Do we need to do something about that?
So we're going to be finishing at 7 o'clock. So I think we've got time for just one more question, and then I think we're going to wrap things up, if that's okay.
Okay.
So Maggie's asked how you encourage the use of sustainable materials in the design to help educate users about environmental considerations that go into designing a building.
Yeah, okay, I'll go first on that. So the Bradfield School project, we particularly won that competition on the basis of our environmental proposal. And it was interesting through the course of that project how pupils engaged with it in different ways. It is the environmental design is something that we're all beholden to push forward and try and do our best to maximize. And most of our designs now, we would have environmental strategies that we'd put forward to clients, so we'd try and promote and encourage them to take forwards. But in terms of making them into a teaching aid, from science teachers taking away bits of insulation so they could take them to their classes to discuss with pupils what the materiality was and what the performance was. That was something that happened at Bradfield, to having pupils coming and sitting in on site meetings, or having up a signboard or a display board that explains the environmental strategy of the building. And also at the end, having display screens, television screens, and a whole website set up so that teachers and pupils could interrogate how the building was actually performing in real time and could understand the different aspects incorporated. And although a lot of those things were incorporated in Bradfield, there are smaller aspects of that, or more limited versions of that that we put into lots of our different buildings, whether it's just a display panel about what's incorporated, or setting up a signboard, or trying to have a talk with pupils so that we can at least pass on some knowledge and education as we go forwards.
Yeah, great. Good, okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Mark and Charles. That was been really really interesting talk, and thank you for taking those questions at the end there. If you don't have anything more to add, I think we'll say goodbye.
Great, thanks, Will.
Okay.
Thanks everybody for coming. And yeah, good luck and thank you.
Great.
Bye.
Well, thank you. Yep. Thank you very much, Charles, Mark. Thank you to everyone else who's joined us, and we wish you all the best. And
bye-bye.
We'll see you again. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.